It is now my delight to introduce our next speaker, Christophe Bahuet, UNDP Deputy Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, to deliver his closing keynote. UNDP is a knowledge partner of Unlocking Capital for Sustainability and a long-time collaborator of ours. Prior to his appointment, Christophe was the UNDP Resident Representative and Country Director for Indonesia, and his earlier assignments with UNDP included China, Vietnam, Ghana, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine. Christophe will be joining us here today virtually. Christophe, hi, thank you for joining us. I'll hand the time over to you.
Hello, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. I feel very happy and privileged to be able to join you for this closing part of today's event. And let me thank EcoBusiness and UNEP for inviting me to join you and deliver these remarks just now. I could not travel to Singapore, but I've been connecting through the day from Bangkok and listening to a conversation. I have to say, I really found them most enriching and very, very many pertinent comments. So when I, make those closing remarks, I would like, of course, to share with you some reflections and experience from the United Nations Development Programme work in Asia and the Pacific when it comes to sustainable finance, climate action, both being very important part of the work, but also pick up on some of the reflections, comments that were made during the day and that are, very relevant for us to take away. But first, let me do a little bit of context setting, because when it comes to, wrapping up and reflecting, I think context remains very important. And the first thing, a few points, but the first one is that Asia remains an engine of growth. Growth recovery in Asia after COVID has been solid, maybe not full, but very solid. And when you look at all the economic analysis, cost projection, the engine for global growth is really in Asia. That's, I think, a very important factor when it comes to sustainable finance. But there are, however, two caveats. The first one, there are some uncertainty when it comes to growth in Asia and probably some countries, and just with the latest weekly edition of The Economist on China. But also there are questions in the longer term about the growth model for Asia and whether what has worked thus far for a number of countries, probably in Southeast Asia, would work in the time to come. And if you have looked at the latest Regional Human Development Report of UNDP, will really raise that question and give an answer that actually we need a different growth and development path for the region. So growth is important and quite solid. Human development is also, a success story in Asia. We have seen progress in income, we've seen progress in life expectancy in education, but here again, there is a very important caveat that it goes with inequalities. Very marked inequalities, probably within countries, income inequalities, gender disparities, regional disparities. And that's actually, to some extent, when it comes to sustainable finance, that's actually an obstacle when we come to it. And then third, the Sustainable Development Goals. It was very good to see them, featured in the event, in the forum. But as was mentioned in the morning, Asia is actually off track for to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal by 2030. And surprisingly, and maybe of particular concern, Asia is faring partly bad when it comes to SDG 13, which is climate action. And that's happening in a region which is, the most vulnerable to climate change, I would say, with a number of countries partly vulnerable to climate change, but also the mere share of populations directly vulnerable or already affected by climate change. And it is also the region that accounts for about 30% of global greenhouse emissions and, about 50% of coal consumptions. So, climate action is not there. And I think energy transition, which was much discussed today, is lagging behind in Asia. And we really need to have an acceleration. And we have a sense of urgency as well. At the United Nations, I hope all of you, urgency because of the number of severity of natural climate-induced disasters. And just look at not only the articles, but also the very striking video footage from Vietnam with Yagi over the last days, and the impact, not only in terms of lives lost, but also economic damage, and what it tells us about resilience of infrastructure, risk integration in construction. So a sense of urgency because of the disaster, also to meet the Paris Agreement, not because it's an international agreement that we have to honor, but because of what it means in terms of slowing down the rise of global warming. And of course, the Paris Agreement requires a lot of political commitment, but also financial commitments. And I'll come to that in a moment. Now, the context also involves geopolitics, and we heard Kishore this morning, so I'm not going to elaborate more on this, but just to complement, also at the country level, we should not forget there are a number of, very strong vested interests that would act against energy transition, for instance. So political will, and there's also a message from the United Nations, UNDP, that political will is extremely important, and we need to make sure it is there. From an economic point of view, not to contradict what I say about the growth, but the current context is not an ideal one for sustainable finance because of debt. Look at Sri Lanka, look at Laos, look at other countries where debt levels are really alarming. Cost of living, obviously, but also limited revenue, partly for national budget, partly due to insufficient income and tax systems, which actually limit the fiscal space and limit the role of public finance in addressing climate action. And therefore, we have, and that was very much underscored, we have needs in terms of financing, but we also have a very significant gap between the need and what is available in terms of resources. So that's a kind of context as we see it evolving. But there is also, and you need to be, when you work for the United Nations, you need to be an optimist. You need to have an ideal, maybe step-forward optimist, that was mentioned earlier in the day. But we do see progress. And I find it very striking that, sustainable finance is really there. It's actually now a subject of consensus. And we can debate about regulation, about other things, but what I've been hearing throughout the day is actually there is consensus about the need to mobilize sustainable finance to address environmental, social challenge, an agreement about the need to bring together public and private finance, about the need to unblock finance, sustainable finance, private fund, of develop new instruments. I mean, we can say that we were all converted already in the room, but I believe it's actually, it's actually a true consensus that has emerged. And also a real debate, and I think this, event today is a very good example of the vitality of the debate. And it was mentioned I was in Indonesia. When I came to Indonesia in 2015, we were not at all talking about sustainable finance. It was really not there. Huge difference has been made, and there is now a very dynamic thing, but also very concrete, tangible progress. I think green finance has really taken off. Look at instruments, Indonesia Green Sukuk being one example I have in mind. Now, of course, green finance, the market could be much larger, but there is a positive trend. We also see some very good initiatives being forged and around, for instance, energy transition. So just energy transition partnership in Vietnam and Indonesia, with all its complexity and expectation that needs to be met, remains very good examples. And maybe we need to see more just energy transition, whether they are formally called partnerships, JP or others. We need to see more of those energy transition. But already those two examples are actually very encouraging. We see dynamism. We see, and I think Singapore is a very good example. We heard Ravi this morning, sharing with us a number of initiatives that the government of Singapore has taken, which was very good to hear. But also you have a very dynamic scene in Singapore with companies, venture capitals, foundation like Temasek. So that's very encouraging. And also at the regional level, and partly in Southeast Asia with ASEAN, we see some very interesting development. A regional ASEAN taxonomy, or the joint action by ASEAN Stock Exchange to actually have common ESG metrics, actually a very good example of cross-border and from country to country example. So there is a sense of progress being made. Now, for this progress to be confirmed and to be of a higher impact, we do need to have actions taken. And so part of my closing remark is also call for concrete actions. And let me just divide it in, for convenience sake, three big constituency groups. First, government. For government, it's absolutely essential that we see the implementation of the commitment made. Let's take the nationally determined contribution. A number of very ambitious commitments have been made by the government of Asia. And it's good to see, let's take, renewable energy. You see really a kind of very ambitious commitment on the share of energy, of renewable energy. But we need to deliver on those. We need to make them a reality. And that goes with policies and regulations. And not to repeat the debate that took place early in the afternoon, but regulations are important. I'm not talking about bureaucratic, I'm not talking about over-regulation, but policies and regulations, laws that actually set the frame, that actually set the rules of the game, also set incentives, are absolutely important, but are not enough. Because, and the point was made, and I very much agree with that, if you have policies adopted, but they're not implemented, that doesn't make any difference. And I think, for UNDP, sometimes we work with government on policy formulations, legislations, but if, they're adopted and not implemented, actually our work is of very little impact. So the implementation of policies, and including with penalties, as we mentioned, is absolutely a must. And we need actually to see stronger action in this. Second point for government is public finance prioritization when it comes to national budget. With a much more, and the fiscal base can be constrained, but I think we need to see stronger prioritization given on long-term climate actions in particular, in terms of allocation, but also in terms of incentives, also incentives given to the private sector. And for the public sector and government to go much more actively towards blended finance. Again, the point is very valid that was made this morning, I believe, that blended finance has a huge potential, but it remains a very tiny part. And part of the reason for this is actually that, government, public finance has not played its full role in terms of blended finance. And last set of actions for government relates to, I would say, maybe the soft side of governance is about institutions. That's SDG 16, transparent, accountable institutions, and tackling of corruption is absolutely essential. Indeed, it has a direct impact, I believe, about unlocking private sustainable finance. Just look at the debate that took place some time ago in the Philippines for the Maharlika investment fund and the safeguard that have been placed. So corruption is actually, tackling corruption is very, very important. There could be more, but let me just leave it at those three key messages, three actions for government. Now, when it comes to private finance, private sector, energy transition, as was mentioned, is important subject of a lot of attention, which is good. I think it's important to look at various dimensions of the energy transition. Energy transition is multidimensional, so it has to do with reducing fossil fuels, but also increased use of renewable, improve energy efficiency, electrification, access to energy, grid modernization. So all those aspects have actually to be, targets for investment, and also two cross-cutting dimensions. The first one is really looking at being inclusive, being participatory, looking at the population group and involve them in the transition. And that's something is part for us as United Nations, leave no one behind, something we're very attached to. And I would say also focusing on mitigating, when it comes to investment, focusing on mitigating the socioeconomic impact that are there coming from climate. And there was a line in the Insights report of last year that really resonated with that. And that's a line about the need to shift from investment that have actually low emission reduction potential to investment that have a very high emission reduction potential. And that's part of the transition and the role that public and private finance can play in energy transition. Maybe we need to shift the needle a little bit and to move to low energy, low impact to higher impact when it comes to addressing impact of climate change. I would also say that while it is fine and good to see so much attention given to energy, we should not overlook other sectors. I'm thinking of transport, I'm thinking of waste management, forestry, agriculture, tourism, which account for a large share of emissions. And that also should be part of sustainable finance, maybe to a much higher level. And if you look at, circular economy and some of the discussions that are taking place in the region, that's very much part of it. We need to see investment distributed across sector. And finally, very important for the private sector, the companies, and that was very much illustrated by many points during the day, to embrace very actively and operationalize their business activity, a number of mechanisms that exist. It's impact measurement and management. It's ISSB, it's ESG, just use the acronym, but also the nature-related financial disclosure. When it comes to nature, and the point was made earlier in the afternoon, nature is very important. Now, UNDP is part of the task force. We need to see much more companies engaging on the nature-related financial disclosure. And it was good also to see that there is some progress in the companies, in the countries, adopting those kind of, mechanism and report. What we heard from, sustainability report in Indonesia, the progress in quantity, number of companies that are actually now producing report is important. Of course, it would have to go to quality, but that's, I think, a welcome development. And turning to the last constituency, which is, I would call it, the international development partners, including the United Nations, IFIs, international financial institutions, also bilateral donors, developed country. I think the commitment to sustainable finance is extremely important for us. UNDP, we've made it part of our key document, our strategic plan. We have a sustainable finance hub as part of our structure. We have a moonshot objective. It's also important for us, all international partners, to play a role in terms of capacity building, in terms of policy making and work together. We have also, we have many good examples of traditional partnership, UNDP working with Sweden, UK, European Union, but also new partnerships. I was listening to Mari Wavemaker. We have in Singapore a great partnership with Wavemaker. We've also been collaborating with Temasek. So these new partnerships are extremely important, very much part of the way we operate now as international organizations. I think finance has to come from the public side, and I would say from developed countries in terms of the funds instrument that have been set up, but that needs to be replenished. Matching between the project and the investor is important. Look at the SDG investor maps. We have them now in 12 countries, probably in Southeast Asia. Extremely important and valuable, and also have a number of initiatives. I think, we have with the Asian Development Bank a Blue Finance Accelerator in Indonesia. We have Impact Venture Accelerator in 12 countries of Asia. So a number of initiatives that are being taken by UN agencies and other partners have a very strong potential. And that led me to my last point before I conclude. We should not forget also the very small initiatives that are being taken by small enterprise, medium-sized enterprise, individual. That was a kind of, bottom-up approach that Kishore was talking in the morning. And it is actually very, very active in Asia and the Pacific. And that's something to capitalize on. And therefore, what stands in front of us, as we conclude this day is first, the need to do gap bridging, bridge the gap between the finance available and the needs. And we reduce that gap gradually, but hopefully speedily, and then making the shift from non-bankable to bankable project intervention, shift from pilot small scale to large scale and replicability, and shift from local to national to regional. I hope, we are making good progress in terms of acceleration and scaling up, and I hope that it will be also part of the takeaway from this event in Singapore that we take with us for our next actions in terms of sustainable finance. Thank you very much.